Hey guys, so when Canon announced their RF mount mirrorless system, one of the most exciting things about the whole system was the awesome lenses that were coming out. And while the lenses were very exciting, the price tag for a lot of them was not so exciting. And one of the exciting lenses that has come out for the RF mount is the RF 24-70 f2.8. And while 24-70 standard zoom lens f2.8, that's not so exciting in and of itself. That's pretty normal to find. But this version comes with image stabilization built into the lens. And while there are some 24-70 f2.8 options with image stabilization, that's not very normal for a first-party lens manufacturer to put into their 24-70 f2.8s. But again, with this lens, it does have kind of a hefty price tag. So today I'm going to look at what are the pros and cons of this lens, how good is it, is it worth that price difference over some of the EF mount options, and who might it be right for? So when it comes to ergonomics and build quality with this lens, like all of the RF mount lenses, they are mostly a tough plastic build. They're not all metal like a lot of the EF mount L lenses are, and this theoretically at least helps cut down on weight and definitely helps the lens's balance with the mirrorless camera bodies. However, it does come with a metal lens mount. As an L lens, it also has weather sealing and comes with an included lens hood. So more practically with weight, this RF version of the 24-70 f2.8 weighs 1.98 pounds or about 900 grams, whereas the EF version 2 that is all metal actually weighs 1.78 pounds or about 805 grams. But if you are using a mirrorless camera, then you will have to use the RF mount adapter, and the standard mount adapter is 0.25 pounds or like 110 grams. And so the weight between the two is pretty much the same at that point. So as far as what we have on the lens, of course, there's our zoom ring, there's also a manual focus ring, and this is an electronic focus by wire system, but I actually enjoy how Canon has implemented the focus by wire system on the RF lenses. You can couple it to a distance meter, so when you're focusing in your EVF, you can actually see the distance meter rather than having to look at your lens if you're trying to manual focus and use the distance meter. We also have two switches, one for choosing between manual and autofocus, one for turning the image stabilization on and off, and we have a zoom lock on this lens to keep the lens from creeping out as you're traveling or walking around with it. And overall, this lens is bigger and heavier than the 24-105 f4L kit lens, but I still think that it pairs really well with the R and the R5 and R6 bodies and is actually very comfortable to walk around with and shoot with and use. So when it comes to photography, 24-70 is really versatile for most shooters, and something that most shooters, especially if they do any shooting professionally at all, are going to have in their bag pretty often. The 24mm wide angle focal length all the way to the 70mm short telephoto focal length, it gives you a lot of options in what you can shoot all in one lens. And the f2.8 constant aperture is reasonably good for low light, especially when you pair it with these R series cameras that all do pretty well in low light. The image quality with this lens is great, color reproduction is really nice, it handles chromatic aberrations really well, and I will say I found like a tiny bit of purple fringing when shooting directly into the sun on the R5. But in order to find that, again, I had to shoot directly into the sun and zoom all the way in on the high resolution sensor of the R5. I'm fairly confident that if this had been on one of the other sensors in this series, it wouldn't even have picked up that little bit of fringing. So I was overall very happy with that performance. And sharpness on this lens is also very good. One of the advantages of the RF mount is that really close flange back distance, which means the back element of your lens can get really close to the sensor, and that can help the image be much sharper because you don't have to bend light as much to fit it onto the image sensor. And what I'm about to say isn't specific to this lens. In fact, it's very normal for zoom lenses, and that is that on this lens, when you're all the way out at 24mm, the back lens element is right up against the sensor. But as you zoom in and once you get into 70mm, that back element moves further and further away from the sensor. And I was interested, and it did turn out as I expected that at 24 millimeters, it is sharper than at 70 millimeters. But again, I'm testing this on the R5, and even at 70 millimeters, which would be the least sharp part of the focal length on this lens, it's still very sharp, and I would not have any hesitations about the sharpness of this lens, even at that 70 millimeter focal length. Autofocus performance is amazing on this lens when paired with the eye autofocus, especially in the newer R5 and R6. I really didn't have any issues. It was a dream shooting with the 24-70 and the R5 together. I basically didn't have to think about autofocus and could just shoot what I wanted to shoot. Now this lens has image stabilization, and I say this a lot when it comes to image stabilization in this kind of standard focal length range for photography. For me, it's really not a big deal. You're not gonna really need that image stabilization to get sharp images as long as you're using a reasonable shutter speed. And if you go below that reasonable shutter speed and you are photographing anything that moves, so people, trees, animals, anything that is not going to just be still the entire time, then you're going to get motion blur from your subject anyway. So I don't find it particularly necessary in this type of lens. However, it's nice to have, and it does give you more creative flexibility to do more creative handheld shots and just have a little bit more flexibility to know that your shots are going to be just a little bit more sharp. So I think this is a great lens, and I don't think any photographer is going to really have any issues with the quality of this lens for photography. The question really becomes, is the difference in price worth it over some of the EF options? And when you're paying that price, then there's also the RF 28-70 f2 to consider, which is even more expensive. And so I think that's more of the issue, price to value versus is this a really good lens? Because for photography, I don't have any issues with this lens. So when it comes to video, again, this zoom range is very versatile. You have 24 millimeters, 35, 50, not quite 85 at the long end at 70, but you can get a lot of what a lot of shooters are going to need all in this lens, and with a fast aperture at f2.8, it's going to perform really well in low light as well. And like I said in photo, the image quality on this lens is great and holds up even to the high resolution 8K footage on the R5. Plus, this lens adds image stabilization, and the image stabilization is, for me, one of the biggest features on this lens for video shooters, especially if you're shooting handheld. The image stabilization in this lens works really well for video, and when you pair it with the in-body image stabilization of the R5 and the R6, it is really a dream to shoot handheld with. So for me, I think this is the best fast aperture standard zoom lens for shooting handheld video, because again, it's a very versatile focal length range from wide angle to short telephoto, and the image stabilization just makes this really easy to get nice, really usable footage handheld with. And if I had to get rid of all of my lenses and only have one lens, it would probably be this right now. So who is this lens for? And I want to start by saying this is easily the best image quality from a 24-70 f2.8 lens on a Canon mount. And again, 24-70 is a really versatile zoom range, especially when paired with that fast aperture. So it's a great lens, really versatile, really useful lens for most people. But then the price becomes a big factor, because new, this lens is about $2,300. And if we look at the EF version 2L lens of this, that costs $1,900 brand new. And then we also have third-party options on the EF mount, like for instance the Sigma 24-70 f2.8 art lens, which is actually a lens that I have. And that lens also has image stabilization built in. I will say the image stabilization in the Sigma lens is not so great for filming if you're going to be moving around and panning using the image stabilization, but it does work well for handheld static shots, and it works well for photography. And that Sigma Art lens you can find for about $1,000 new, and if it goes on sale, which it's been doing a few times recently, you can get it for even less than that. Then there's also the EF 24-70 f2.8 version 1, which still has solid image quality, and you can find used pretty regularly for somewhere between $700 to $800 depending on the condition you find it in. And then, of course, there's also the RF 28-70 f2, and the price of that is more than this easily at $3,000. But with that $3,000, it is also a full stop faster at f2, so that's twice as much light. And you are also losing some range at the wide end from 24 to only being able to go to 28. What I will say is I think this is the best option 24-70 at f2.8 for filming handheld because of the awesome image stabilization in this lens. I will also say as a caveat to that, if you are using the R5 and the R6 that already have in-body image stabilization, the optical image stabilization isn't as necessary because the IBIS in those cameras is already really good. And if you don't need that IS, I do think that the image quality in this RF version of the lens is the best that you're going to find. However, the difference between that and say the EF version 2 or even the Sigma might not be enough to justify that jump in price for you. Of course, if you just don't want to have an adapter with your lens, then this is the only option for the 24-70 f2.8 on the RF mount right now. But I will also say that having the adapter and an EF lens can give you some extra options, like for instance the ND filter adapter, and then you have your ND filter behind your lens, and if you're using EF lenses, you don't have to switch it out on the front of your lenses every time you switch lenses, which can be helpful. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. In the comments below, let me know, what do you think about this lens? Are you interested in getting this one? Is the RF version going to be best for you, or maybe one of the EF options? If you are interested in this lens or any of the other gear I've mentioned, in the description to this video below, I'll leave affiliate links. If you purchase through those links at no extra cost to you, it'll help support this channel a little bit so that I can continue making videos for you guys. If you haven't yet, hit the subscribe button. See ya.